Good morning, PASW staff and clients and friends joining us. Welcome to Wednesday's class. I feel like we need to get back into some jazz work, and it's been a long time. We've talked about a lot of jazz musicians. We've talked about John Coltrane. We've talked about Miles Davis. We've talked about Lee Morgan. We've talked about Bud Powell. There's probably others that I'm forgetting because, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many classes we've been doing, right? It's been so exciting. So we've talked about bebop, jazz, right? So here's jazz, the umbrella, bebop music, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie. And then what's the other one? Do you remember? I don't know why I'm asking you because there's nobody else in this room. Cool jazz, right? Cool jazz with who? With Miles Davis. We're going to talk about another cool jazz trumpet player and singer, and today we're going to be talking about Chet Baker.
They're writing songs of love, but not for me. A lucky star.
Chet Baker reached stardom in the 1950s and one of the most famous West Coast cool jazz trumpet player and singers of all time, and it's, you know, we'll talk about his life and do a little rundown, of course, because I like to do that. But we're also going to talk about why he's so important. We always go back to that question. You know, is it great because people say he's great? You always want to go back to that question, and it always makes me, in choosing these classes, think, is this something that is important to talk about? So yeah, we're going to look at a lot of his styles and techniques that kind of made him a revolutionary, and I don't think he was out at all to be revolutionary. I think he was just a natural, and we'll talk about what made him just a natural, and I think you're going to like his music a lot. So let's get into it. So his early life, he's born in Oklahoma in 1929 to a musical family. His dad was a professional guitar player and his mom was a pianist. But with the Depression, they moved to Glendale, California. So kind of, and he goes to Glendale Junior High School. So kind of is from LA, not from LA, but grows up in LA and starts singing in the church choir. So this is when he starts using his voice. And his dad gives him a trombone, but he thinks it's too big. So what's smaller than a trombone? We've talked about this in class before. A trumpet, right? So within a few weeks, he just starts practicing all the time and using his ear and starts playing the trumpet just effortlessly and so naturally. So and here's one of the things about Chet Baker as we listen to him throughout this class. He wasn't musically trained. He tried. He studied a little bit at Glendale and then did a little bit at El Camino school in LA, college, sorry. But he never had formal training and didn't know how to read music. Instead, he used his ear. And he actually said that I would rely too much on my ear instead of the notes. So I think he would try to get the training, but I think his ear got in the way. I think he heard something. His ear was telling him what notes to play, what notes to sing. So actually reading music would have gotten in the way. He goes into the army though, and so in 16 he leaves, and but he comes back to LA, and he's playing the trumpet, and he's in this listening to a lot of Miles Davis and other cool jazz trumpet players, and there's this audition that Charlie Parker is having at the Tiffany Club, which we talked about on 8th Street, right over here, a few blocks away. And he shows up at 3 p.m. to audition, and Charlie Parker likes this guy. So although Charlie Parker's, the founder of bebop, both of them, and we talked about that recording, the Inglewood Jam recording that was recorded down the street. Even though they had different styles, it was interesting to hear them play together. And this is one of, he's in his early 20s, Chet Baker, so he's yet to really achieve any fame. But you can hear how easy it sounds like, and what a breath of fresh air. when he plays these notes. You know, I mean, it's different than Charlie Parker, but so because of that, he really becomes really well known when he meets this baritone saxophone player, Jerry Mulligan. Now, Mulligan has this quartet. Quartet is four, right? Four musicians. So when we think of a jazz quartet, we think of piano, bass, drums, and then a horn player, right? A saxophone, trumpet, trombone. It could be a singer. Well, here, Jerry Mulligan has saxophone, bass, drums, and a trumpet player, Chet Baker. So they have this pianoless quartet, which was not unheard of because Dixieland and earlier music didn't have pianos because, you know, marching bands, because you can't carry a piano down the street. But for jazz, for 40s, 50s cool jazz, that's pretty unheard of because piano provides what? Harmony, right? Because you can't play harmony on a trumpet. You can only play one note at a time. So without having a piano, they come up with this new style of playing together. Not separately at the same time, but together. And we won't get too much into this, but they're composing on the spot, and what they're doing is providing counterpoint. Now, the easiest way to describe counterpoint is it's pretty much more than one line going on at the same time. Okay, so if it's just a singer singing one song, that's not contrapuntal. If it's a singer singing a song and another singer singing a melody around that song, not the same line, then counterpoint becomes more involved. And then that's orchestration because you have flutes, trumpets, you have 80 people, and sometimes they're playing the exact same line, but most of the time there's harmonies going on. So it's more than one line going on, and it sounds like this. This is what their sound is like. And this is actually recorded at The Hague, and we might talk about The Hague. It was a very famous jazz club that's not there anymore, but again, a few blocks away from my place, right in Koreatown, where all this exciting jazz was happening. It wasn't called Koreatown back then, but yeah, it was just down the street. And the song that really makes them famous, this quartet, is their version of Richard Rodgers' song, My Funny Valentine. This really put them on the map, and not only on the jazz map, but a little bit further on the popular map, because the sound was so original. You have that walking bass, and you hear how kind of mellow and sensitive it sounds. And they're both playing at the same time. You would think a baritone sax player and a trumpet player playing at the same time would just result in chaos, but it's actually it's very smooth and intimate. So he becomes really famous in the 50s and 60s, but like many musicians, suffers from a very bad addiction to heroin and speed. And I don't want to dwell on it, but it's hard to not mention because drugs were such a part of his life. Unfortunately, he died at 58 in 1988. He fell out of a window in Amsterdam, and it's terrible. So, but he although 58 is very young, he did record a lot of music and was pretty prolific. And Elvis Costello was a big influence on. He was influenced by Chet Baker and had him on his album in the 80s. And there was kind of this. Chet Baker kind of became this kind of cult hero figure before he died, so he was able to, I think people were getting into his music from the 50s and 60s that he had recorded and made famous. So let's talk about his style. Why is his style so different, and why was it different for back then? Well, okay, his phrasing, right? His phrasing both on the trumpet and his voice is so different than everything. It's so sensitive. His playing and singing is so vulnerable. Now, when you think of singers in the 50s, what do you think of? Sinatra. We think of trumpet players and singers, Louis Prima and Louis Armstrong. They were trumpet players with singers. Here's Chet Baker, a trumpet player and singer, and he sounds nothing like Louis Prima or Louis Armstrong. And when he sings, he sounds nothing like a crooner. He sounds nothing like Bing Crosby or Sinatra, and he's singing without using any of his body. It's all head voice singing, and there's no vibrato. If you listen to it, it's completely vibrato-less and somewhat feminine sounding tenor voice. So different back then. I mean, Mel Torme and June Christy kind of had that thing, but for a male singer in the 50s, and again, I'm giving you the context of the 50s, this kind of non-masculine singing was really different, and I don't think he was doing this on purpose. I think he was just using his ear. This was his originality. He didn't, and I think people thought maybe he was trying to make a statement or a political statement, but he was just like, no, you know, like, I like girls, but I sing like this, you know. So, and that's a quote. So it was really different. It's a very different way of approaching jazz standards, and I just think what I love so much about him is his vulnerability when he's singing and playing, his sensitivity, but vulnerability. And somebody pointed out his self-protectiveness, and that's interesting. It does sound like he's protecting himself, and we don't know from what, but I think he was introverted, and I think much like Bud Powell and drugs being a part of their music, unfortunately, perhaps they were trying to escape or use their playing, their jazz playing, as a way of not overcoming their addictions or whatever, but expressing their loneliness and their joy to us through their music and improvising. So for not reading music and playing by ear his whole life and making a living off of not reading music, but being one of the greatest musicians in the world, truly remarkable, and changed the way male singers were singing, and you know, and just a genius and a one of a kind, and buried right over here at Inglewood Park Cemetery, so very close to school, so next to his father's, and what a genius. So I hope you enjoyed this class on Chet Baker. We'll talk about some more jazz. I'll try to find some happy jazz musicians. I don't go out of my way to do this, trust me.
Yes, I may dream a million dreams, but how can they come true?
I got a good 4th of July present coming up for you guys, so we'll look forward to that. Okay, love you guys, miss you guys, bye.
You